Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church. And today we're going to be in Acts 27, verses 27 through 44. And this is the shipwreck that Paul and Luke is in, all those who are traveling with him. We looked at yesterday, or if you were with us yesterday, we saw the storm at sea. And so we'll read that, look at through some notes, and go through and finish this up. It says, about midnight on the 14th night of the storm, as we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed land was near. They dropped a weighted line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. But a little later, they measured again and found it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid we would soon be driven against the rocks along the shore, so they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officer and the soldiers, "You will all die unless the sailors stay aboard." So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. He says, "You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks." He said, "Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair on your heads will perish." Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat, all 276 of us who were on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing the cargo of wheat overboard. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed toward the shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship struck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape, but the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to the shore. And so, looking at this, right, just some of the notes real quick on this one. The Sea of Adria, which Luke writes about here, it includes the central portion of the Mediterranean. It's south of Italy and Greece, and it's between Malta and Crete. It's now known as the Ionian Sea. And so that this is where they were stuck at or trapped in with this storm. And they in the New Living Translation it says that they were measuring. They knew they were getting close to land, and so they measured it out. And in Luke, well, in the New Living Translation, it says 120 feet, 90 feet. In the actual Greek, it was 20 fathoms or 15 fathoms. And a fathom equaled about 6 feet. And so just kind of give you an idea of what that looked like. And I just wanted to throw that in there for, to give an idea. Because like I said, we study from the New Living Translation, but other versions would have, the Greek would have been actually 20 and 15 fathoms. And so we see this time that the soldiers actually listened to Paul. They did what he said. This is a good example, especially as Christians, right? Having our faith in God. Paul's words and actions are those of a true leader, right? He personally assessed a really bad, a perilous situation. He decides on action, right? And he leads others in solving the problems. I mean, everyone else was just freaking out. Everyone else basically was like, well, this is hopeless. We're not going to be able to make it. And Paul was positive about it, right? And so his positive example and his strong faith in God encouraged the others to eat and take heart. And so, I mean, you can imagine 14 days of this would have been horrible. You can understand why they were down. And so Paul was able to lift them up. And then, so the food, and then he offers them the food. Hey, let's eat, right? This food brought renewed strength and encouragement to them, especially a very frightened and they would have been exhausted. Probably didn't get much sleep. Been working on the ship, trying to keep it from falling apart, throwing things overboard, all that stuff. And so it was a very exhausted crew and group of prisoners. And we see Luke write about the fact that there was 276 of us, right, or of them when he writes this. And so this is the exact number of person, or this exact number on board fits well with what is known of grain ships of that period. If you remember, Luke wrote about the fact that they were transferred to a grain ship, and so again, more accuracy. We see, that Luke writes about on his journey here. And so they decide to run the ship aground. They see shore. They see a beach that with a bay that looks like they could get in there. And so they do that. And unfortunately, they hit ground sooner than they wanted to off of a reef. And so the the prisoners here, right? Even in something in a situation like this, the prisoners remain the responsibility of the soldiers. So if the soldiers got away, even in a shipwreck, they were responsible for it, and so they were going to go ahead and kill the soldiers because they didn't want to be responsible for them getting free. Fortunately, we see the commanding officer, right, intervene because he wanted to save Paul. Paul had done a lot to help them out, and so with all of this, we see, right, that it was a clear indication of God's protection. And we see that all 276 of them survived, made it to shore, even those who couldn't swim, right? He said that the ones who could swim jump overboard, swim to shore. But then he was like, and then the ones who couldn't swim, they were able to get overboard and grab a hold of things, the planks and stuff like that were floating. And this precisely, all of them surviving, this precisely fulfilled the angel's promise that all of them would survive. And so I just think it's an interesting journey for Paul so far, right? I mean, he's just wanting to go to Rome, and for whatever reason, God is taking him on this journey to get to Rome. And I think it's kind of a reminder to us that, a lot of times on the way to what God wants that the path to what God wants us to be, or the journey to what God wants us to be, or where God wants us to go, it's not always going to be easy. And sometimes it's going to be really hard, and there's going to be some shipwrecks, and there's going to be some storms. And so, but we don't see Paul complain. We don't see any of that. He remains positive in all this. But man, I mean, that's rough. It's like, why couldn't he just let me get to Rome, right? And so, but we see all this. We see that he stays positive. And so tomorrow we're going to see that that them on the island of Malta, which is where they are shipwrecked. We'll look at that, and then we'll see where eventually in the next couple of days we're going to see where Paul does arrive in Rome. They are able to get on a ship and eventually make it to Rome. And so again, I hope y'all were learning from these. Like I've said on last few, these are I understand that these are um, historical. It's not a lot of theology type stuff, but it's still good examples of how we are to be in situations as Christians. Paul's a good example of what we should look like as Christians in a crisis, putting our faith in God, under believing that God's looking out for us and has the best intentions for us. And so I just hope that we continue to do this and use this as an example to learn from and show the world as Christians how we are to be in situations like this. So, as always, I encourage everyone who is not subscribed to our channel to go ahead and do so. That way you can kind of stay up with us and as we continue through this study. And as always, more than anything, I really appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.